Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, I should say. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And tonight we have our friend Erica Ruth Neubauer here with us to discuss her brand new, I want to make sure I get the name right, Jane Wonderly mystery. And this is book three? Three, yeah, that's what I thought. Danger on the Atlantic. And Erica signed a batch of books for us. I'll put that right there. And I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field should you wish to purchase one. And also, if you have questions for Erica or Barbara, go ahead and just put them in. And Barbara usually calls me back on screen towards the end of the hour. So Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. This is such a great cover. I don't know if you all can, now there's probably too much of a glare there, but Patrick has it. It's really very nice, and it really suits a golden age mystery, which is kind of what Erica is. I mean, a modern take on an older form. But interestingly enough, Erica, in her background, has served in the military and been a police officer. So why did you decide to go more towards the cozy side than the side that one would think you might actually embrace?
Yeah, I have been asked that before, like, why you were a cop, why aren't you writing procedurals? Because I followed the advice that someone gave me, which was to write what I wanted to read. And this is what I love to read. I love not only the old historical ones, the Agatha Christie's and the Dorothy Sayers, but I also really enjoy historical mysteries coming out today. So it's what I love to read.
Oh, that's an excellent reason. And the 1920s are really fun. You know, when I opened the store, Erica, the 1920s and the 1980s weren't that far back. But now what we're considering historical mystery has moved dramatically up in the 20th century. And in fact, I've actually selected one for our May historical fiction book of the month that's set in 1989 Romania during the revolution, partly because I think that it's something people should read about. And I think it might be on the border of historical fiction, but the 20s are it's an interesting, that interwar time. There was a lot of denial. There was a lot of kind of frantic behavior. There was a lot of grief. There was a lot of sadness. I mean, it's a real ragbag time of emotions. And with Prohibition in America, that added something to it. When Prohibition was something like around 1926, wasn't it?
It was. It went until the early 30s. So
right. No, I know it went on into the 30s, but it didn't start. I think we have a tendency now to think that Prohibition was like all the 20s, but it really wasn't.
No, I can't remember what year it started, what year it kicked off though, but you're correct.
He was in the mid-20s. I often wonder if that accounts in part for the stock market crash. Right. And, like every attempt to legislate human behavior and morality, it led to some really awful consequences, some terrible health problems because people drank stuff that could poison them, or they drank too much because you couldn't really be civilized.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting. We can see a kind of reflection in this with all the stuff going on about whether marijuana is legal or, now we're trying to legislate people's sex lives and, all the rest of it. And it absolutely never works.
Never goes well.
No, it always leads to worse consequences than the perceived evil that, we were trying to legislate. So there we go. Anyway, this wonderful series is set in the 1920s and does reflect Erica's background in the military because it moves around. So we first started doing this with Murder at the Mena House. So cool.
Yeah. Still I still am so grateful that I got to go there. And you had got to go there as well.
I did. Yes. Stayed there and loved it. One of the real travel highlights of my whole life was sitting out on a balcony as the sun was just coming up, and I had coffee and I had a chocolate that they had thoughtfully left in room service because there was no sign of milk or anything. And so, coffee and chocolate are actually really great together. Yeah. Sitting there and watching the Great Pyramid gradually come out of the, kind of early morning darkness into the light. It was extraordinary.
Yeah. Now, Barbara, I know you do a lot of other traveling too. Have you done a transatlantic cruise before or just cruises?
Well, I wasn't going to bore you with this, but I may
Well, I
be
would
the
like
only
to
person that you will talk to who actually sailed on the old Queen Mary
know.
and the old
Really?
Queen Elizabeth. When I
Oh,
was 15, as the eldest grandchild, my grandmother wanted to go to Europe. And so I went with her. So it was 1955. It wasn't that, it was like, not quite 10 years when we went after
yeah.
the war. So much of Europe still had those scars. Those two ships, both Cunard liners, had
Yeah.
been requisitioned as troop ships during the war.
Yeah.
And they kind of restored them. And I'm trying to remember, because we were with a group, whether we were third class, sort of steerage, or second class. I know for sure we were in first class, but as I recall, because I mean, I was young and more malleable then, I
Yeah.
think that there were like two bunk beds in our room and kind of a basin for washing in the bathroom down the hall. So my guess is that this tour group had booked third class. Subsequently, maybe it was in the 90s or very early in 2000, my
Yeah.
sister and I traveled to Europe on the new Queen Elizabeth, coming towards kind of the end of her service. So completely different. My sister, who was a lecturer, traveled first class and I traveled second class, but they let me, which is unusual for a Cunard because they're really hard about this, they let me eat with her because she was a single. So I got to eat in first class. I
Nice.
slept.
In
I
second
slept
class.
in second class. Then, now I'm not done yet. My husband's cousin was the treasurer of Cunard for a long time. So his mother really liked traveling on Cunard, and she insisted that we go on the maiden voyage of the Queen Mary 2. And that voyage was not that long after 9/11. And therefore, we had an actual armed, kind of like a gunboat. I don't know what you'd call it. Anyway, we had an armed escort ship. And that trip went from Miami to, I think it was Barbados, somewhere in the Caribbean. This is a real itinerary. Then I went right across the Atlantic to, I'm trying to think, it was an African country. And we toured slave ports and so forth. Then we went up to the Canaries, which the volcano wasn't going on. Then we went to Madeira, which was really cool.
Wow.
Then we went to Lisbon and around France and ended up in Southampton, whereupon the ship's engines failed as we were coming towards Southampton, seriously. And it was hours late. And so nobody could make all their connections. And we ended up being bused to Heathrow and having to stay. I know. But anyway, my point is that I have been on, all of those ships. So I've made 4 transatlantic crossings. A liner used to be the airplane. So, if you wanted to go to Europe from the United States, most of the time your best bet before really long haul airplanes was on a ship. So did those. And then the Queen Mary 2 voyage was really intended to be more of a cruise ship. Right. But then I've been all over the world on ships, but specifically the liner that you're talking about.
Yes.
But what's fun is I got to be in all the classes.
That is really fun.
Yeah, because the last one we went on, we were in first class. I forgot to mention that. So I've been in steerage, second class, and first class on these ships. And I'm here to tell you that there is a really dramatic difference. And travel how you felt about your trip and all would be a real reflection of it. And then most of the time, certainly today, the class that you can travel on, though most cruises are now single class, so they got rid of that. But it was really about what you were willing to pay.
Yeah.
If you wanted to fork out for first class. But that's not really true on Cunard, because Cunard, being British, really still, how class is really a British thing, whereas race is the American thing. And even on the voyage of the Queen Mary 2, they really drew barriers. I mean, they were mostly economic, because I tried to take an author to lunch who was traveling in whatever low class was, and they wouldn't let her in the dining room. And I had a real fight with the steward at the dining room, and eventually dodged around to it. Anyway, long story. But with the British, it's not just money. It's also whether you would fit in socially and so forth. So even if you paid a fortune to travel first class on one of those ships, you would not necessarily have a super comfortable trip if you didn't happen to fit, how that went. So have you done that yourself, or have you taken any of it into account in writing your book?
So I did do it right before the pandemic. I did the Queen Mary 2, and we took it from Southampton to New York. And it was fabulous. It was, I would say, November is when we did it, because it's kind of when I have Jane doing it. It's not the best time to do a transatlantic cruise. It was pretty, but
ships are way better than they were when Jane was doing it. They have stabilizers now, and there's various treatments for seasickness and so forth. So even though the North Atlantic is a bitch, and you can run into terrible weather, it's probably not going to be as awful as it might have been when Jane was doing it, when there wasn't much that you could do to ward off seasickness.
Very much so. Yeah.
So why are they on the ship? Here they are. I forgot, we left out a chapter. We were in Egypt at the Mena House.
At the Mena House.
Jane's there with her aunt.
Yes.
And she's a widow and happy to be one. Really happy to be one.
Very happy.
She meets the mysterious Mr. Redvers.
Yes.
And then we follow them in book 2 to Wedgfield Manor. So now we're in England in the countryside. So how did we get from the Mena House to England?
So things are revealed at the end of Mena House that made it a natural progression for me to take them to England to do a visit there. I don't want to give too much away in case someone hasn't read the first book. But it was a natural thing for them to do. And then, so that book centered pretty heavily on veterans. There were a lot of veterans working on the estate that they stayed on, because I'm a veteran. Not of the First World War, obviously.
Quite no.
And then one of the veterans on the estate is killed. And so Jane investigates, and Redvers is there. And so now this is the first case where Jane is actually being brought in officially on one of Redver's assignments. Their assignment is to be on board this ship and to suss out who is a German spy. And I picked that as their reason for being on. I knew what I wanted the location to be. I knew I wanted to set it on a transatlantic cruise. It was the golden age of cruising. But I really just looked up like what was happening in 1926. And I stumbled across an article by Robert Goddard, who was a physicist. And he was saying that he was doing very secret testing of liquid propelled rockets. And he later said that he thought the Germans had somehow stolen his technology and used it in World War II. And that sort of sparked it for me. I was like, oh, what if a German spy had come across and stolen his technology? And so what if the British were trying to intervene? That's
an excellent premise. Now we're missing in this book, we are missing Jane's aunt. So her aunt, I think you can at least reveal what's happened to her aunt.
So her aunt is now engaged to Lord Hughes, who owns Wedgfield Manor. And so she is staying behind in England. But for anyone who's very disappointed to not have Aunt Millie in book 3, she is definitely back in book 4.
Oh, well, I thought, that maybe you married or have engaged her to kind of sideline her so that Jane could have more independence.
A little bit. I think she shows up. I actually have a Christmas novella that I just finished and turned in, and will definitely be marrying off Aunt Millie. And then, after 4, she'll be less of a influence.
Well, since Jane and Redvers, in order to maintain this charade that they actually are sharing a cabin, and if Aunt Millie were along, it would definitay not work. So you did have to leave her.
I really did
her behind at Wedgfield Manor, but I think if she eventually marries the Lord and whatever it all is, that she could still play a role. Because if Jane and Redvers are going to remain peripatetic, aren't they? I don't see them settling down.
No, and I don't see myself settling down with a book in one place either. I fully intend to keep moving them to different locations.
Well,
So,
travel was a huge thing in the 20s. My husband's grandparents had, I remember seeing at their home, Alberley, which is their estate in Pennsylvania. I went to his grandmother's funeral there, and they had these amazing travel trunks, that people did, and they were gorgeous. They were quite large, and people, they dressed much more formally. They had changed their clothes more than once a day for sure.
yeah.
They usually took maids or, valets with them, because even in the 20s, getting dressed on your own, if you had all that stuff, was hard work looking after your clothes. But those trunks were absolutely amazing. They were just like a portable closet. They had drawers and they had compartments, and you hung up all your clothes so that when the trunk was closed, it wasn't like your suitcase where everything gets smushed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool.
And they had luggage space. Actually, in another place in Egypt, not Mena House, but in Luxor at the famous Winter Palace Hotel, I can remember going up to my room on the second floor. I was traveling with another author because she was doing research, and I was just, I was there for the good time. And also, I'd been to Egypt before, so I was the trip planner.
Fair.
I could not believe the width of the corridor. I have never been in a hotel corridor that was just enormous side to side. And then I realized that hotel had been built in the Thomas Cook area. It was built in the time when women were wearing those enormous Victorian crinolines and so forth. And they were traveling with trunks and servants. And the hotel corridors was set up, to accommodate that.
Wow.
I mean, it makes it a wonderful, they've had to update the hotel and all, but it really makes it a fabulous experience to stay there. It feels so luxurious because it has so much space.
Yeah.
Not space necessarily in the fancy rooms downstairs or whatever, but up in the hotel corridors, which you don't run into. Also had very high ceilings because it's so hot in Egypt that was a way of air conditioning things.
Yeah, let it rise up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of pluses to travel in the golden age of travel, but of course there were a lot of bad things too. There wasn't any medicine. There wasn't, I mean, it was a pretty high risk thing to do if you think about it. Jane and Redvers are young and relatively healthy, but if you're going to tour them around, got to think about that. In fact, since you're going to Istanbul and before, which you've mentioned, then you have to think about, stuff like drinking the water and other things.
Yes.
So you're going to allow for that, right?
Yes. Yeah, because you wouldn't be able to. Right? Yeah.
No, you can't. Ice is the highest risk thing. This is what trips up people when they go to countries, South America, Asia, whatever it is, and Americans go there. Everybody thinks they're going to be really careful, and then they forget and they have ice in their drinks, and there you go. Yep. I've fallen into that trap myself.
Yeah.
Right. So they're sharing a cabin on this liner, but their courtship, if we want to call it one, hasn't really advanced all that much.
It has not. Sort of. It has a little, but she's still very cautious about it. And I think in this book, she definitely lets her guard down a little bit more with him.
Well, it's hard not to when they're in the same cabin.
It is. And I did really enjoy it. So they're pretending to be married. It's a fake marriage. And I really did enjoy writing that. It's fun.
Well, why is it that Jane, for those who haven't read it, what is Jane's background that would make her so averse to getting involved with not just Redvers, but any man?
So I gave her a pretty dark backstory. Her situation, she comes from a marriage where there was severe domestic abuse. She has scars all over her back from the beatings that she took. And she wasn't able to talk to her family about it. It was the 1920s. It wasn't something that was discussed. And she didn't think that she would be believed because he was so charming and basically a sociopath. So why she's not sad that he perished in the war. And I chose that as her backstory because as a police officer, I saw quite a bit of domestic violence. Those are cases that, officers are always being called to. And it really struck me. I mean, not only are they really dangerous for both the people involved, but also the officers showing up on the scene, but just, it really feels like you're putting a Band-Aid on it and you're walking away. And I wanted to just shine a light a little bit on it in a different way. And so this was my way of doing that.
Well, I think, having him killed in the war means that Jane is not a suspect. Well, I mean, if he died in other circumstances, it's perfectly possible. But this way she gets to have the facade of a widow, but inside she's rejoicing.
Exactly.
How much does her aunt know about it?
She does not know anything about it. I think her aunt was he was one of her favorite relatives. And so Jane has not shared with her Aunt Millie at all about it.
So Jane's, kind of used to leading a secret life. Yeah, she really is. And it helps her in this mission that she's undertaking with Redver. Now, exactly how is she there in a semi-official capacity? She's an American.
She is. She's posing as his wife because his theory was that it was going to be less suspicious for a married couple to be there than it would be for a single man or a single woman to be there investigating. So the two of them are there as a married couple, registered.
But I mean, it's an informal. She hasn't been tasked by anybody official, right?
No. I think it's just the first time that his whoever he works for has sort of sanctioned her sort of joining him on it.
Right. So that's a good way to get them to America and spend time together. So they board the ship and Jane sees something that has some significance later on. So take us from there. How far do you want to tell us about what happens? So
in addition to the German spy situation that they're trying to suss out, when they're pulling away from the dock, Jane sees this couple who are very affectionate and that draws her attention. And later she sees the woman, she's talking with the crew and saying that her husband has disappeared. And they at first really are like, he's just probably off catting around on board somewhere. He's met a woman, like you're overreacting. He'll show up. And then and Jane overhears this, and then she sees her again trying to tell the crew, look, his trunks are gone now. I cannot find my husband. Why won't you help me? And so Jane steps in because she did see the man, like he is real. And now the crew kind of doesn't believe that the woman actually ever had a husband with her and might be hysterical. And Jane definitely steps in, and so that becomes her own personal investigation.
So is this woman, using a modern phrase, is there a suspicion she's been gaslighted? Or see, I mean, with modern security, boarding a ship and all, you couldn't do this anymore. They take your photos, they whatever, so they do know who's on the ship. It's not well, I shouldn't say unusual. There are people who disappear off ships, either suicide or accident or something, but I don't think there's any real question anymore that they were on the ship.
Correct. But I think it was a lot less, it was so much, there's so much less security, so much less. I mean, you had stowaways on board ships. Did a lot of research about ships and was really surprised that people, there's some people that made a game of it until pretty late, where they would stow away on a ship and see how far they could get without getting caught.
Well, there's some classic, stories of boys, who.
Right.
Yeah. But those are more adventure stories and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I can imagine. I mean, there are people who try to stow away on airplanes. There have been a couple of people recently that have been in the wheel well.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they ever survived it. In fact, I don't think one did, but I do think I remember somebody, probably was Miami, where somebody actually had managed to hide in the wheel well of a major airliner. Wow. Yeah. I don't think that was for fun. I think that was more a question of desperation. But I can see, and on one of those old really big ships with all a lack of security and so forth, you can imagine that somebody could easily hang around.
Yeah.
And, there's always food to be scavenged. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't be all that hard, to, if you could find a uniform, for example, or some kind of a maid's outfit or something, you could probably pass yourself off as one of the staff,
Right.
and conduct. So here we are with, not, one of the advantages of a ship is that you've recreated an Agatha Christie's, country house. In other words,
Yeah.
whatever's happening on the ship, only people on the ship can't really be suspects. So was that in your mind?
Yes. All three of them really, I really enjoy the whole closed location where kind of all your suspects are right there. Book 4 will not have that, but I have really enjoyed that with all these 3 settings.
Yeah, you have, because Wedgefield Manor really was a country house murder, and the Mena House was essentially a country
house murder.
at least.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like that, that design. We think of Agatha Christie, but lots of people used it. But it can really apply to all kinds of situations. An ocean liner would certainly be one, or any kind of a ship, a theater, be a hotel. Well, a hotel is harder because a hotel is porous. But anyway, any place where you can get a group of people together and the perimeter is pretty solid, then you've got a setup for a fairly classic murder mystery. Although you decided this one would be more of a spy story than a murder story.
I did. And the next one's kind of an adventure story. So I have been taking them a little bit different directions, just for fun. And try. Yeah.
Now, is this your first publication? I mean, did you write anything that was published before you wrote Murder at the Mena House?
I had one short story that was in a collection of and that was more like a friend, and it was for a charity thing. But other than that, no, I Murder at the Mena House was really like my first crack at creative writing, really.
Wow. Well, it's certainly been one of our most popular paperbacks. We've done well. I mean, I think the staff really like it, and so they push it. I just reordered some just a little while ago. And I think it's great that you've had so much success with it. I see that you have won an Agatha Award. Tell us about that.
I did. I won the Agatha last year for Best First Novel. And that really meant so much to me because I, growing up, read so much Agatha Christie. And my dad would watch so much Agatha Christie and Masterpiece Mystery and all of that. So it was especially meaningful to me.
Oh, well, that was a very nice tribute to Murder at the Mena House. I like that a lot. I mean, there were many features of it that were fun. Part of it was the location, part of it's the characters, there's the murder. All kinds of fun things go into it. Cozy, we talk a lot about modern cozies, and it's a whole genre, but there are also historical cozies, although I tend to think of them more as golden age. I mean, Miss Marple is basically a cozy, if you want to define it that way, but we don't really call her that very often. There are not, generally modern cozies come with recipes or knitting patterns or various appurtenances, so to speak. And there's a lot of them fall into like cooking, or they're bookish, or they're about pets, or you're making chocolate, or whatever it all is. Whereas a more classic cozy is just a mystery without a lot of overt sex and violence. So right there, right. Are you going to have any overt sex, or is it all going to be behind closed doors here?
All going to be off the page.
Oh,
I know. I'm sorry. There is a little more kissing in this book, if anyone's looking for that. But it's good.
Well, people had pretty wild sex lives in the 20s,
Well, I'm sure that I'm going to save that for a different series.
A different series. Well, I was going to ask you. You're having a really good time with Jane, but are you thinking of doing anything else, or is that too soon?
No, I have some other ideas, and it's not outside the possibility that I would actually write romance as well. I mean, so we'll see.
Well, whatever you like. Your publisher is actually fairly wide ranging.
They are.
So, that'd be really good. Well, tell us a bit about going to Istanbul. Is there anything you can reveal?
So Istanbul was, I really like picking a thing, kind of like I did with Robert Goddard. I really like picking a thing that is like a historical fact. So Istanbul is a little bit of an adventure story. They're looking for her father, and her father is a professor of Turkish history, and he is obsessed with finding the Sultan's heart, which is a real artifact. The Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent was died on the battlefield in, I think, the 1400s, and his internal organs were taken out and buried there on the battlefield. And his body was returned to Istanbul, but his heart was never found. And so now there's this sort of mystique to it, like, oh, it might have mystical powers, and they've never found it. People are still searching for it. I think they think they might be getting close, but it has never been found. So that's what her father is searching for. And so that's what Jane and Redvers are trying to track down, both her father and the artifact. So
the 1920s in Turkey were really an interesting time. Turkey was frontline World War II battlefield, the Gallipoli campaign, which didn't go well for the Allies. And out of that, Kemal Ataturk became basically the George Washington of Turkey. The Ottoman Empire was overthrown, and they established a democracy of a sort, and it was a secular one. And I've been really sad to see that the secular nature of Turkey has been so eroded under Erdogan. The first time we went to Istanbul, nobody was wearing headscarves, nobody was wearing hijabs. Everybody mingled. There was a very active Christian and Jewish and other communities. The Blue Mosque was definitely it's right across from Hagia Sophia, and Hagia Sophia had been turned into a museum. It was built as a Christian church, a Greek Orthodox church under Justinian back in 32, and then it became Muslim after the Ottomans took over Turkey. But then it became a museum for a long time, and now it's been turned back into Muslim religious, a place of worship. And it's not like I'm opposed to that, but I really thought that Turkey was a real beacon of a modern society in which religions could all live together. And it's sad to see that it has that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, it has eroded.
So, but when you're there, that is what's going on. So you can write about it. You can go to the Para Palace Hotel, for example.
That's where they're staying.
Perfect. And I want to point out to you, because the first time I stayed at the Para Palace Hotel, it had not been remodeled. So it was still the Para Palace Hotel. That was is the terminus of the Orient Express, was down the road in Istanbul, in the station. And then people were taken up to stay at the Para Palace Hotel, which was built as kind of a classic Ottoman thing. And there were servants' rooms up at the top with a big balcony, and kind of you could open the windows up there. And then as hotels were built back then, the rooms, the only real ventilation they had was maybe one window, but then there would be a transom over the corridor. So they could be really noisy. Because, but there was no particular airflow. So it was quite hot when my husband and I checked in, and they took us to our room, and they had, and I think they still have it, this original elevator, and they wouldn't let, it's all brass, and there's a special guy that has to operate it because it's, pneumatic, and I mean, it's fabulous. Anyway, we went to our room, and after an hour or so, we couldn't even breathe. So we went down to see if there was some other, and all the rooms were like that. So we ended up in the servants' rooms. I mean, they were aghast at the hotel. But the reason we was because up high, there was cross ventilation if you opened the windows. But the downside of it was when you're peacefully asleep, when the methane comes out at 5 a.m. to to call you to prayer. And all the windows and everything are open, it makes you like levitate off the bed. So the downside, I mean, the good side was we had ventilation and we could breathe, and the downside was it was extremely noisy.
Wow.
Last time I was there, they had completely renovated the hotel.
Yeah.
So it will not be the way Jane would have seen it. Now it has, air conditioning in the whole bit, and the restaurant is completely different. I don't know I know they've kept Agatha Christie's room because she stayed there. It's on the 4th floor.
Yes.
And she wrote there. And when we were there the first time, they had kept Kemal Ataturk's suite on the 1st floor intact. I mean, he had died by then, but it was like a museum to Ataturk. And I don't know if that's still there or not.
I don't know if it is. We weren't able to take a tour. They weren't. We didn't stay there. We just stopped and had a meal. It's a beautiful hotel.
Well, it certainly would have been there because that's where he more or less lived. So you could certainly have him in the background as you're writing it. I'm so envious. I would love to write a book set in Istanbul. It's such a fabulous city.
It really is.
Are you going to wander into Topkapi? Or are you going to, take us down into the cisterns? What are you going to do?
Yep. I'd have them down into the cisterns, the Basilica cistern, and then the Suleiman Mosque, where both Suleiman and Roxolana are both buried. Or that place pretty big. The bazaar, of course. It's been really fun to write.
I bet it is. And I one of the great things about Istanbul, people talk about Venice, and how the water is wonderful and you can spend all your time cruising around, especially if it's hot. That's a really good idea. But Istanbul has all this water and has a terrific ferry system. I mean, fabulous ferry system. And even some islands down the Dardanelles where people had summer places that get out of the city. And that's a wonderful day trip. In fact, you can take there's a ferry that goes down there. You can spend a day wandering around to these wonderful old houses.
That sounds lovely.
I mean, it's a gorgeous place.
Yeah, it really is. And the food is wonderful. I really had a lovely time.
Oh, good. That sounds grand. What kind of reader reaction have you had to Danger on the Atlantic? Have people been as enthused as they were about the first 2 books?
I've had good reactions to it so far. I think I will say I've had some friends who were very disappointed that Millie's not in this one. But other than that, I think the reactions have been pretty good so far.
Did you have, do you find that as you've written 3 of them now, your characters better? Is it easier to write them? How do you relate to your imaginary friends who populate this book?
It is a lot easier. I do feel like I can really just drop in much easier into Jane's head, into her world. And I really do feel like I know the characters a lot better now. But I really still enjoy spending time with them, which is a beautiful thing. Since you end up spending.
And when Murder in the Mena House, I wasn't entirely sure that Redver was going to be a permanent fixture in Jane's life. I mean, there was always a chance. By now, since this conversation, I'm sorry for spoiling anything for you, but you figured it out. But there was a chance, that he was there, and he was, a mysterious and interesting character for that book. But he didn't necessarily have to turn up. Did you always intend him to be a co-lead, so to speak?
I always intended him to be the love interest, and because I like a little romance in a novel myself, I was not going to get rid of him. So I always intended him to kind of be her wingman, if you will.
Yeah, well, I was happy to see him turn up. So there's a description from somebody about Murder, Danger on the Atlantic that I think is really fun. This outing has all that is needed in a book: adventure, an Atlantic crossing, spies, socialites, smuggling, and a twist that even I didn't see coming. Which I think is I was looking on Goodreads and I thought it was a really nice summation, but I really like that idea: spies, socialites, and smuggling. So much fun.
Yeah.
Yep. Patrick, do you want to pop up and see if there are any questions that the audience has developed?
Sure. Let's see here.
We got something.
Well, there are a couple of people that are new readers, and they say, is it better to begin with the first book, or can we jump right into book 3?
I would say start with the first book, especially. I think it's fun to watch things develop between the characters. But that's just me. I think you can jump into book 3.
Yeah. You could do it either way. I think that there are always certain spoilers in relationships. The mystery is complete in each book. So that is not, it's not like the mystery in Murder at the Mena House carries over to Danger on the Atlantic. But I mean, this is only book 3. So it's not a huge burden, to start with book 1. But if in fact you stumble upon Danger on the Atlantic first, you can then go back and read the other 2. And I think that is always the risk in a series, is that it's the relationship things that move on, and you can, but it's whatever appeals to you. The first 2 are out in paperback, if that influences you at all. So they're a lot less expensive as an entry point if you start with Murder at the Mena House and Murder at Wedgefield Manor.
Yes.
Is it a challenge to figure out, as you continue on with the series, just how much backstory you need to put in to kind of orient the reader with each book, a potential new reader?
It is. I think it's a really fine balance, because you don't want to bore your readers that already know what's happening,
Right.
but you do want to give them enough that they know that you can catch people
Gotcha.
up. I think it's a fine balance.
Right.
Do you end up keeping a kind of a, I don't want, diary's not the right word I want, a log, so that you know what color the eyes are in your characters and their ages and all that?
I wish I had done that from the start, and I really, really need to go back and do that going forward. I've had to go back into old manuscripts and do a search.
Right.
So,
I mean, with a long running series, once you give them a particular eye color, or a baby of a certain age, or they have a dog, or whatever it is, you're stuck with it. And so you have to figure out how to either keep track of it or move them forward, or in some cases, move them out.
Yes.
Right.
It is handy. My copy editor for each book does give me a little bit of a rundown of each character along with my copy edits, which is helpful.
I have a question from Fred. He says, Erica, your bio says that you spent 11 years in the military.
Yes.
Thank you for your service. What branch of service were you in? And does your military experience come into play in your writing at all?
So I spent 11 years in the Air Force. I was 4 years active duty, and then I did the reserves, and then I did the Guard, all Air Force. I think it comes into play because I'm a full-time writer. I write novels, and then I also do some tech writing and editing. And I think the military has taught me a lot of discipline, where I go every single day to my coffee shop or to my couch, and I work in the morning. And I think I can thank the military for giving me that discipline. 7 days a week, I sit down and I work, because it's my job.
Let's see. Boots on the ground, right? Every day.
Yep, every day. It's on the ground.
Let's see. I've got a question. What does it say here? Oh, Joyce, our friend who watches a lot of our programming. Thanks, Joyce.
Nice.
She says, thank you so much for your participation in one of the authors in support of Ukraine auctions.
Oh.
I'm so excited that I had the winning bid for your book package.
Congratulations.
She said, I loved the first 2 Jane Wonderly adventures, and I'm looking forward to this new one.
That's exciting.
Yeah. She's a cool lady.
Did we mention, either one of us, Patrick, that Erica Ruth signed books for us?
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning. Sorry,
I did. I put a link. In too.
Okay.
Joyce also has another question. How did you decide on Redver's name? She says it's such a great combination of dashing spy and comedy.
So I came upon it. I already knew what Jane's name was going to be. I love the name Jane. And Wonderly, I borrowed from the Maltese Falcon. It's one of the aliases that British Shaughnessy uses. But for Redvers, I didn't know what I wanted her romantic interest name to be. So I was just going through old, like British, like records of names from the late 1800s when he kind of would have been born. I got pretty far down the list and nothing really spoke to me. And then I found the name Redvers and I was like, oh, I really like that name. But I was like, I think I'm just going to use it by itself, kind of like Cher. And I went with that. And then I thought at the end, because then I thought it added some mystery and he just goes by this one name. And then at the end, I decided to just pick a name that sounded a little silly to me and throw that in.
Sounds almost like Jeeves. Redvers could be the butler.
Right?
Yeah.
No, but I think she's right that there's a certain mystery. Somebody that just has the one name.
One
Yeah.
name.
You wonder what they're withholding.
Yeah.
And whether the first, do you remember, Patrick, all the way back when Morse, there was a huge, because he was always just called Morse.
Right.
And then finally there was all this drama and all that. Colin Dexter was going to reveal Morse's full name.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you remember this, Patrick, but they sent out, the British publisher anyway, sent me an advanced reading copy and they forgot to put it in. So I remember writing a review and saying, well, they were going to tell us what Morse's whole name was, but those rats, they reneged. And then they corrected it and I felt like a moron. But, it was a really big deal.
Yeah.
Because it had been withheld for, I don't know how many books.
Yeah.
But what is his name? Do you remember,
Right.
Patrick? Is it Endurance, something like that?
Close. Endeavor.
Oh, that's right. That's why the TV thing is called Endeavor. Yeah, exactly. And by the way, that if speaking of Morse, for those of you who might have watched Morse, which I thought was terrific, and of course, ultimately sad, I do think that Inspector Lewis that continued it was excellent, but I really like Sean, whatever his last name is, in Endeavor.
I do
And
too.
sadly, Roger Allam, who was his police boss and mentor, I think has as he's grown up, as Morse has grown older, he's exited Endeavor. And I'm sad about that because, but where he's appeared of all interesting things, M.L. Longworth's wonderful French mysteries set in Provence. There are 3 on BritBox, I think it is. There are 3 of those have been turned into like serial television. Yeah. And Roger Allam is the judge. He's the judge in those books, and they're wonderful books. So if you liked him in Morse, you can find him on BritBox now for Murder in Provence.
Cool.
Excellent.
Have you guys seen Foyle's War?
Yes.
3 times.
Yeah.
It keeps getting recommended. I need to watch that.
Oh, Patrick, it's wonderful. And honestly, that is one you need to watch from the beginning.
Yes, it's so good.
You want to do season 1. Anthony Horowitz has really been fabulous with Midsummer Murders.
Oh,
still, Carolyn Graham and I, what was it, 1990? I think it was 19. Yeah, it was. We're sailing down the River Dart towards visiting Greenway, Agatha Christie's house, when she announced that Anthony Horowitz had been so taken with her first book that he was going to turn it into television. Of course, there wasn't any such thing as long form television then, so, and it's still there.
It's still, I know.
You still have Midsummer Murders all this time later.
Yeah.
He's really incredible. Writes books, right? He's got a new James Bond book coming out, either his second or third one. I guess it's the second. I think he wrote A Time to Kill, might have been the first Bond that he wrote. Several people have written James Bond books. And now that we've had the last Daniel Craig James Bond movie with its apocalyptic ending, it'll be interesting to see the way Horowitz has approached it.
Yeah.
Kids books too, tons of.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, he's he's even done sort of meta mystery with, where he himself is a character.
Right. A novel within the novel.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
Exactly.
he's an amazing, but I still think with all of that, Foyle's War is truly his masterpiece. It is, and also the cast is brilliant.
So good.
Is that an original story that he came up with, or was it based on a novel?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah, I don't
Erica,
know.
any idea?
I don't know the answer.
I realize
I'll look
it's
it up.
a
I
digression.
think he wrote this. I think it's original material. I could
think
be
it is
wrong,
too.
but I can't remember Foyle's War. I'll look it up. I'm going to be you, Patrick. I'm going to do the chat feature while you talk to Erica Ruth. How exciting.
I've always admired in the background is your home an kind of a classic arts and crafts era?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Beautiful
built in
woodwork.
1924.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Does it have a lot of its original features intact?
Yes, a
Excellent.
lot. We were
That's
very
great.
fortunate. You hate to come in and have it all painted, but we've still got like built-ins with the stained glass, and it's all still original wood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, ours is 1926, and we really lucked out because a lot of the interior features, like all the original doors with the glass knobs,
Yeah.
and the original kitchen cabinets that go way up to the ceiling, those are
Yes.
still there.
Yeah.
And yeah, over time, a lot of that stuff gets taken out, unfortunately.
Yeah. Milwaukee's interesting though. We have a lot of what we call Milwaukee bungalows, but there are a lot of these arts and crafts style 1920s with the built-ins and all the woodwork, and it's an area here in town really rich with this kind of stuff.
That's great.
Nah.
Well, they were built to last,
Yeah.
unlike a lot of newer construction.
Yeah.
As far as I can work out, it's original to Anthony Horowitz. And here's something I didn't know, that William in episode 1, is played by his son.
Oh.
Casting characters. William is played by Cassian Horowitz, son of series creator. So I think it is original Anthony Horowitz. And the casting in it is fabulous. I'd totally forgotten. You had Robert Hardy and Rosamund Pike and Charles Dance and all. I mean, it's absolutely brilliantly cast.
Yeah. Yes.
Sounds great. Yeah, I need to watch that.
It is. You will be absolutely addicted to it once you start it.
Have you thought of casting choices for your series if they made it into a TV show?
I have struggled with this mostly because I am not super familiar with modern actors. I am more familiar with old
Classic
actors and actresses. What I've come up with though is I think that I just watched the new Murder on the Orient Express the other day. Mm-hmm. And I thought Daisy Ridley did a really good job. And I thought, you know what, she could make a really good Jane. And I think the only man I could come up with for Redvers was Henry Cavill, because he's got that jaw. So,
there aren't too many like Peter Lorre's walking around these days,
right? No.
Yeah.
Short on
Hayden. Yeah.
Short on the Cary Grants and the. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, I think that's it for all the actual questions. Let me see if there's anything new that's come in. No.
All right. Well, in that case, I've been sitting here. I got out my own fabulous teacup so that I could be doing like high tea as we would have done, in fact, on this liner. And now I've drunk it all, so that tells us time to go. Anyway, it's always a treat to talk to you, Erica Ruth. And,
such a pleasure.
And we really enjoy your books so much. And I can hardly wait now to read the Istanbul book. And I'm going to have to wait a year, right? Because now we just have now gotten Danger on the Atlantic. But it's a lot of fun. And any of you who have not read Murder at the Mena House and Murder at Wedgefield Manor, I certainly highly recommend them to you. So thanks for spending time with us.
Thank you so much. Pleasure as always.
Good. Bye.
Bye.